The clinking of a spoon against porcelain was the only sound that broke the silence in the Whitakers' kitchen that evening. Outside, dusk had settled gently over Lancaster County, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet. Inside, everything felt still, too still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Linda sat at the oak table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching Daniel stir his coffee with deliberate slowness. There was a heaviness in the air, one she couldn't quite name, but it coiled in her chest like a storm about to break. When he finally spoke, his voice was maddeningly calm. "I need to tell you something," Daniel said, eyes fixed on the swirling steam above his cup. "I'm seeing someone else." For a moment, Linda thought she'd misheard him. "What?" Her voice came out thin, almost childlike. "I've been with Vanessa for a while now," he continued, as if discussing the weather. "And she's pregnant." The words didn't land all at once. They came in fragments. Vanessa, pregnant, crashing through her like shards of glass. Her breath caught. "Pregnant," she whispered. "You're having a baby with her." Daniel didn't flinch. "Yes, and I'm going to be a father, something you could never give me." It felt like the floor shifted beneath her. 11 years of marriage, the sacrifices, the doctor visits, the endless cycles of hope and heartbreak, all reduced to the sentence. "That's not fair," she choked out. "You know how hard we tried. It's not like I chose this." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Tried? You lied to me, Linda. Remember that? You told me you were pregnant just to get me to marry you. I should have seen then what kind of person you are." "That was 11 years ago," she said, her voice trembling. "I was scared. I loved you. And I've spent every day since then trying to be the wife you needed." "And failing," he cut in sharply. "I'm done pretending. I want a divorce." The word divorce echoed in her head, hollow and merciless. "Just like that," she whispered. "After everything? After all I've given up for you?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, looking almost bored. "What exactly have you given up, Linda?" She stared at him, stunned. "Are you serious? I sold my mother's apartment so you could start your logistics company. I left my job to run this household so you could focus on building your business. I've spent over a decade supporting you, believing in you. And I built that company," he interrupted, his voice rising slightly for the first time. "Me. My work. My ideas. You didn't build it, Linda. You were just here." The words sliced through her. Just here. As if the countless unseen sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the scrimping and saving, the quiet endurance had meant nothing. Daniel pushed his cup aside and folded his hands on the table. "I'm filing the papers next week. The house stays with me. It was my father's and it's in my name. The company obviously is mine too. You'll have 3 months. I'll cover rent somewhere until then. After that, you're on your own." Linda stared at him, her mouth dry, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. 3 months, she managed. "That's it." He shrugged. "It's more than fair, considering. You'll be free to start over or whatever. Vanessa and I are moving forward. I'm not looking back." She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain tearing her apart. But she just sat there, frozen, because what words could possibly hold the weight of betrayal like this? Daniel rose from his chair, smoothing the sleeves of his shirt as though they'd just finished a normal conversation. "I'll stay at her place tonight," he said casually. "I think it's best if we start separating our lives now." The sound of the front door closing behind him was soft, almost polite, a sound that would haunt her for months. Linda remained at the table long after the coffee had gone cold, staring at the grain of the wood as if it might offer her answers. 11 years. 11 years of love and loyalty, gone in the span of a conversation. The walls of the kitchen, once filled with laughter and shared meals, now felt foreign and empty. Her eyes drifted to the framed photo on the counter. Their wedding day, her smile wide and hopeful, his arm draped around her shoulders. She barely recognized those people now. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the wreckage, a quiet voice whispered that this was not the end. But tonight, all Linda could feel was the weight of a life that had just crumbled to dust around her. And for the first time in 11 years, she was completely, devastatingly alone. The days that followed blurred together into a gray, indistinguishable mass. Linda moved through them like a ghost, sleeping little, eating less. The house felt colder now, emptier, as if Daniel had taken more than just his belongings when he walked out the door. He had taken the future she thought they shared. It was on the third morning, as she sat staring at the mug of untouched coffee in front of her, that the phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but something in her chest urged her to reach for the receiver. "Mrs. Whitaker," a man's voice asked. "This is Andrew Coleman from Coleman and Price Law. I'm calling about the estate of Lucille Miller." The name stirred something faint and distant in her memory. "Aunt Lucille," she murmured, confused. "We haven't spoken in over 20 years. "Yes," the man said gently. "I'm sorry to inform you that she passed away 2 weeks ago. In her will, you're listed as the sole beneficiary of her estate. We'd like you to come in to discuss the details." Linda blinked, as if trying to process words in a language she didn't speak. "There must be some mistake," she said. "She had a son, and we barely knew each other." "I understand," Coleman replied, "but the will is quite clear. If you can bring identification, we'll explain everything in person." 2 hours later, Linda found herself standing in front of a modest brick office downtown, its brass plaque gleaming in the morning sun. Coleman and Price, attorneys at law. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. Andrew Coleman was a thin, soft-spoken man in his 50s, with silver-rimmed glasses and the kind of voice that seemed designed to deliver bad news gently. "I know this must be unexpected," he said as they sat across from each other, "but Ms. Miller left very explicit instructions. Her son passed away several years ago, and she had no other living relatives. The estate is entirely yours." Linda stared down at the neat stack of papers on his desk. "What exactly does that include?" Coleman slid a document toward her. "The property in question is located near Willow Creek, about 3.5 hours from here. It includes roughly 17 acres, about 7 hectares of farmland and forest, a 2-story wooden residence, several guest cabins, a cold storage facility, a greenhouse complex, and a functioning mushroom cultivation facility. There are also outbuildings, equipment, and all operational assets." Linda's breath caught. "That sounds enormous. Are there debts? Mortgages? Anything like that?" "No," Coleman said with a small smile. "Ms. Miller was a cautious woman. All taxes and debts were settled before her passing. The property is free and clear." She sat back, stunned. She had expected a shack, maybe an overgrown patch of land with a crumbling shed. Not this. Not something that sounded like an entire business. Coleman slid a pen toward her. "If you sign here, we can begin the probate process. It will take a few weeks to finalize, but once complete, the property will officially transfer to your name." Her hand trembled slightly as she signed. The pen scratched across the paper, sealing something she still didn't fully believe. When she walked out of the office, the spring sunlight felt different, warmer, more alive, as if the world had shifted by a degree she couldn't yet measure. That night, she told Daniel. He had stopped by the house, uninvited, to pick up some papers, his cologne still familiar enough to make her chest tighten. "My aunt passed away," she said flatly. "She left me property. A house, land, a business, I think." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "A business? Out in the sticks." He snorted. "Linda, you don't know the first thing about running a business. You'll last a month out there, maybe less." "Maybe," she said quietly, "but I'm going anyway." He laughed, shaking his head. "You're not cut out for that life. You hate dirt. You can't even keep a houseplant alive." For the first time in days, Linda felt something other than despair. It was small, fragile, but unmistakably there, defiance. "Then I guess I'll have to learn," she said. "Because I'm leaving this city, Daniel. And I'm not coming back." He shrugged, unimpressed. "Do whatever you want. Just don't expect me to pick up the pieces when you fail." But as he walked out, for good this time, Linda didn't feel hollow. Not completely. Somewhere beneath the wreckage of the life she'd lost, something new was stirring. It wasn't hope yet, not exactly, but it was close. And for now, that was enough. The morning Linda left Lancaster was cool and pale, the kind of spring morning that hinted at possibility without promising anything. A thin mist clung to the streets as she stepped off her front porch for the last time, dragging an old suitcase behind her. Everything she owned now fit into 2 bags. Everything else, her marriage, her home, the life she thought she'd built, was gone. The bus station smelled faintly of diesel and wet pavement. Linda bought a one-way ticket to Willow Creek and settled into a cracked vinyl seat near the back. The bus was half full, farm workers heading out for the season, an elderly couple holding hands, a teenager asleep against the window. As the city slipped away and the fields widened outside, she felt both untethered and strangely weightless. 3 hours in, the scenery grew greener, softer, rolling hills and wooden barns, patches of wildflowers blooming defiantly by the roadside. Somewhere beyond those hills lay the land that was now hers. As the bus rumbled along, Linda's mind drifted to the summers of her childhood, when her mother would take her to visit Aunt Lucille. Those days had smelled of pine and damp earth. They would wake before dawn and walk barefoot through the dewy grass to the edge of the woods, baskets in hand, searching for mushrooms among the moss and ferns. Lucille had taught her how to tell the safe ones from the poisonous, how to listen to the forest and read the land. Back then, Linda hadn't understood any of it, but now those memories felt like a thread connecting the girl she had been to the woman she might become. After nearly 4 hours, the bus hissed to a stop on the side of a narrow country road. "End of the line," the driver announced. Linda stepped down, squinting into the sunlight. There was no station here, just a weathered signpost, a gravel shoulder, and a long stretch of dirt road disappearing into the trees. Her phone showed no signal. According to the lawyer's directions, the property was still 3 kilometers away. She shifted the weight of her bags and started walking. The road was uneven, the sun growing hotter as the morning wore on. After 20 minutes, her shoulders ached and her throat felt parched. She hadn't thought to bring water. Dust clung to her shoes, and sweat dampened the back of her neck. "What am I doing?" she muttered aloud, stopping to catch her breath. The silence around her answered back. Birdsong, the rustle of wind through leaves, nothing else. She looked down the road, stretching endlessly ahead, and felt a familiar doubt creep in. Daniel's mocking words echoed in her mind. "You'll last a month out there, maybe less." Just as her knees threatened to buckle, the distant growl of an engine rose behind her. She turned to see a rust-red tractor lumbering down the road, a man in a baseball cap perched high on the seat. The machine slowed as it approached, then stopped beside her. "You lost," the man called down. His voice was warm but wary. "I think I'm headed the right way," Linda replied, brushing hair from her sweaty forehead. "The Miller property? About 2 miles from here." The man studied her for a moment, then climbed down. "That's Lucille's old place," he said. "You must be Linda." Her eyebrows rose. "How did you—" "Word travels fast out here," he said with a half smile. "Jacob Hayes." He offered his hand. "I farm the land just east of the property. Hop on. You're going to keel over if you keep hauling all that." Grateful, Linda climbed onto the flatbed behind the driver's seat as Jacob loaded her bags. The tractor lurched forward, rattling along the dirt road with a steady hum. "So," Jacob said over the engine noise, "what brings you out here? Not many people trade city life for this." Linda hesitated, watching the fields roll past. I just went through a divorce, she admitted finally. I didn't have anywhere else to go. And my aunt, she left me the property. Jacob nodded slowly. Lucille was a good woman. Stubborn as a mule, but good. She loved that land more than anything. He glanced over at her. You planning to stay? That's the idea, she said, though her voice wavered. He gave a small laugh, not unkind. It's a hard life out here. Long days, real work. No shortcuts. The land gives back what you put into it, no more, no less. I know, Linda said quietly, but I think that's what I need. Jacob nodded again, this time with something like respect in his eyes. Then maybe you've come to the right place. As the tractor turned a bend, the trees parted to reveal rolling hills bathed in spring light. And somewhere beyond them, Linda knew a new chapter of her life was waiting. One she would have to build from the ground up. The tractor climbed the last hill and slowed as the road leveled out. Linda leaned forward, squinting past the brim of Jacob's cap. What she expected to see, a weathered wooden cabin tucked into the edge of a pine grove, was nowhere in sight. Instead, something far larger and far more magnificent rose before her. Set against a backdrop of rolling fields and blooming apple trees stood a sprawling 2-story log house, its honey-colored beams glowing softly in the spring light. The structure was enormous, not the leaning farmhouse she had imagined, but a carefully crafted home with a steep, gabled roof and wide verandas that wrapped around its front. Tall windows framed by dark shutters reflected the sky, and a wide stone path wound its way from a set of wrought iron gates through a manicured lawn up to the heavy oak front doors. Linda stared, speechless. This can't be it, she whispered. Jacob chuckled as he eased the tractor to a stop beside the gate. Oh, it's it, all right. Didn't expect a palace out here, did you? I was picturing something small, she admitted, her voice barely above a breath. A little cabin, maybe a barn. Not, she gestured helplessly at the estate, sprawling before them. Not this. Well, Jacob said, hopping down and unlatching the gate. Lucille's boy did pretty well for himself before he passed. Started a landscaping company in Philly, made a fortune, and poured a good chunk of it back into this place. Lucille kept expanding it after he was gone, turned it into something special. They walked slowly up the path, the sweet scent of apple blossoms drifting through the air. Linda's shoes crunched softly against the stone, and with every step, the weight of her old life seemed to slip a little further away. The property unfolded around her like something out of a dream. To the left of the main house, tucked beneath a row of maples, sat a cluster of quaint guest cabins, for in total, each with its own porch swing and flower boxes spilling over with color. Lucille used to rent those out to folks from the city, Jacob explained. Weekend getaways, farm stays, mushroom-picking tours. People loved it. Beyond the cabins stretched a vast greenhouse complex, the glass panes glinting in the sun. Through the transparent walls, Linda glimpsed rows of cultivated beds and the faint mist of an irrigation system. She grew all kinds of specialty mushrooms in there, Jacob continued. Shiitake, oyster, enoki, you name it. Sold them to restaurants all over the state. It was quite the operation. Farther still stood a sturdy-looking outbuilding, a cold storage unit, Jacob explained, where freshly harvested mushrooms were packed and stored before being shipped off to market. And tucked behind a cluster of birch trees, a narrow path led down to a small pond, its surface shimmering like glass beneath the spring sky. Lucille loved that spot, Jacob said softly, said it reminded her of home. Linda turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The sheer scale of the place was overwhelming. 7 hectares of land, carefully tended and bursting with life. This wasn't just a property. It was an entire ecosystem, a legacy built with love, patience, and vision. At last, they reached the front steps. Linda's hands trembled slightly as she took the keys from her bag, the ones the lawyer had handed her a week ago, and fit the largest into the lock. The heavy door gave with a soft creak, swinging inward to reveal a spacious interior bathed in golden afternoon light. Inside, the scent of polished pine and cedar filled the air. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, pooling across the hardwood floors and catching the dust motes in gentle suspension. The entryway opened into a living room anchored by a massive stone fireplace. Handmade quilts draped over the back of a worn leather sofa. On the mantel, a row of framed photographs. Black and white portraits of Lucille in her youth, a young man she assumed was her cousin, and snapshots of harvest festivals and family gatherings offered glimpses into a life Linda had never been part of. Her fingertips brushed the edge of a table carved with intricate leaf patterns. She built all this, Linda thought, her chest tightening. She built it, and now it's mine. Jacob stood quietly behind her, giving her space. She poured her heart into this land, he said softly. Didn't do it for money. Did it because she believed this place mattered. Linda nodded, unable to speak. The house was silent, but it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, as she moved from room to room. The kitchen with its wide farmhouse sink and shelves lined with preserves, the study filled with stacks of agricultural journals, the upstairs balcony that overlooked the orchard. A strange warmth unfurled in her chest. This wasn't the ruin she had braced herself for. It wasn't a burden. It was possibility, vast and daunting and real. Linda stood by a window overlooking the orchard, her reflection faint against the bright sky beyond. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she felt something that might have been hope. Maybe she thought this was where her story began again. The next morning dawned bright and cool, sunlight filtering through the lace curtains of the upstairs bedroom. Linda woke to the sound of birdsong and, for a moment, had to remind herself where she was. The memories of Lancaster, the kitchen table, Daniel's flat voice, the life she'd lost, felt strangely distant here. Out the window, rows of apple trees swayed gently in the breeze, and beyond them, the forest stretched endlessly toward the horizon. After a quick breakfast of coffee and toast scavenged from the pantry, Linda stepped outside, unsure where to begin. The property was quiet, save for the hum of bees and the creak of wood in the wind. She was halfway across the yard when she noticed a woman emerging from one of the guest cabins, short, sturdy, with silver hair tucked under a sun hat and a stride that suggested she had work to do. "You must be Linda," the woman called, her voice carrying the soft lilt of someone who had spent a lifetime in these fields. "I'm Margaret Doyle, but everyone calls me Maggie. I worked with Lucille for nearly 25 years. Linda shook her hand warmly. "I'm so glad you're here. I have no idea where to start." Maggie smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Then we'll start at the beginning." She gestured for Linda to follow and led her toward the greenhouse complex. As they walked, Maggie spoke about Lucille's journey, a story Linda had never heard. Back when Lucille first moved here, this was nothing but overgrown land and a rundown shack, she began. She started small, buying wild mushrooms from foragers in the woods and selling them at the farmer's market. She was relentless about quality, taught herself how to identify, clean, and package every variety. That attention to detail is how she built a reputation. They stepped inside the greenhouse, where rows of logs and trays were stacked neatly, tiny threads of mycelium spreading across the substrate. Once she understood the market, Maggie continued, she realized wild harvests alone wouldn't be enough. So she learned how to cultivate mushrooms herself. Shiitake, lion's mane, oyster, all of them. She invested in temperature control, humidity systems, and eventually built this facility. Linda ran her fingers lightly over a tray of sprouting caps. She did all this herself? With a lot of help from the community, Maggie said. That's the thing about this place. It's never been just about the mushrooms. Lucille believed the land should take care of people. She started hiring locals, taught them how to farm and harvest. She set up workshops for kids, helped fund a small clinic, even supported the school down the road. This land feeds more than just bellies. It feeds lives. They stepped outside again, the late morning sun warm on their faces. Maggie pointed toward the road. See that stretch of property across the way? That's Bowman Foods land. Richard Bowman, maybe you've heard the name, runs one of the biggest agribusiness conglomerates in the state. He's been trying to buy this farm for years. Linda frowned. Why? Because it's profitable, sustainable, and independent. 3 things Bowman hates, Maggie said dryly. He offered Lucille millions. She turned him down every time. Said this land wasn't for sale at any price. And now he's going to come after me, Linda murmured. Maggie's expression softened. Most likely. He'll try to scare you. He'll try to buy you out. But he can't take anything you don't give him. And you're not alone. The people here, they respected Lucille because she respected them. If you're willing to learn, they'll stand by you too. Linda hesitated, staring out over the fields. The truth is, I don't know anything about farming. I don't know how to run a business like this. I don't even know where to begin. Maggie rested a hand on her shoulder. No one's born knowing. Lucille didn't. I didn't. But you'll learn if you want to. And if you put your heart into it, this land will give back. The words settled over Linda like sunlight breaking through clouds. She thought of Daniel's cruel laughter, of how he'd said she wouldn't last a month out here. And then she thought of this place, of Lucille's legacy, of the people who depended on it, of the faint thread of hope she'd felt since stepping off that bus. I want to try, she said quietly but firmly. I don't know how yet, but I want to do this. Maggie smiled, the kind that held both warmth and approval. Then welcome home, Linda. Let's get to work. And for the first time in a long time, Linda felt she was standing at the edge of something worth fighting for. The next morning, the air carried the scent of rain and freshly turned earth, the kind of smell that hinted at growth and renewal. Linda woke early, dressed in old jeans and a flannel shirt Maggie had lent her, and met the older woman outside the main house just as the first rays of sunlight brushed the tops of the apple trees. Ready for your first real tour? Maggie asked, handing Linda a pair of work gloves. As ready as I'll ever be, Linda said, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. They started with the greenhouse complex. Inside, the temperature was warm and damp, the air heavy with the earthy scent of soil and wood. Rows of wooden shelves lined the walls, each holding trays of substrate, a mixture of sawdust, straw, and nutrients. Maggie explained how it all worked, her hands moving deftly as she spoke. This is where it begins, she said. We mix the substrate, sterilize it, and then inoculate it with mycelium. That's the root system of the mushroom. Once that's done, we move the trays to the incubation room. She led Linda to a smaller chamber next door, where the light was dim and the air cooler. Plastic bags filled with white, thread-like growth lined the shelves. This is the mycelium at work, Maggie explained. It spreads through the substrate over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Once it's fully colonized, we move it into the fruiting room. They walked into another chamber where clusters of mushrooms pushed their way out of the substrate, their delicate caps unfolding like petals. Some trays were only just beginning to sprout, while others were heavy with mature mushrooms ready for harvest. From inoculation to harvest takes about 3 to 4 weeks, Maggie said. Timing, temperature, and humidity are everything. Too dry and nothing grows. Too wet and you risk contamination. Linda listened intently, trying to absorb every word. She'd never imagined the process was so complex or so alive. It's like they're breathing, she murmured, watching a cluster of oyster mushrooms fan out beneath the soft light. They are, Maggie said. They're living organisms. They respond to how you treat them. Treat them right, and they'll feed you for years. After touring the greenhouses, they visited the cold storage unit, a well-insulated building lined with industrial refrigerators. Here, freshly harvested mushrooms were stored before shipping. They're cool, earthy scent filling the air. Maggie showed Linda the labeling system Lucille had used and the records she'd meticulously kept. Organization is key, she said. Lucille never missed a shipment deadline in her life. By mid-afternoon, Linda's head was spinning from all she'd learned. They sat on the porch of the main house, sipping iced tea as Maggie pulled a small, worn envelope from her pocket. Lucille wanted you to have this, she said, handing it to Linda. She left behind a reserve fund for the farm, about $20,000. It's enough to cover operating costs for the next few months while you get your footing. Linda stared at the check inside, overwhelmed by the gesture. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it wisely, Maggie said. This land was Lucille's life. She'd want to see it continue. That evening, Linda sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, drafting a plan. First, she posted listings for the guest cabins on travel websites, advertising authentic farm stays and mushroom foraging weekends. Next, she dug through Lucille's old contact lists and began emailing former buyers, restaurants, specialty grocers, even a few gourmet food suppliers, letting them know the farm was still in operation. To her surprise, replies started trickling in within hours. A farm-to-table restaurant in Philadelphia was interested in regular shipments of shiitake. A small grocer in Harrisburg wanted lion's mane. Even a boutique market in New York reached out about a potential partnership. The following days were a blur of activity. Linda met with neighbors who stopped by to introduce themselves, most of them eager to help however they could. An older couple offered to teach her how to repair the irrigation system. A teenage boy from the next farm volunteered to help with harvesting on weekends. And every morning, Maggie was there, patient, steady, guiding her through each new step. They prepared trays of substrate together, inoculated them with mycelium, adjusted humidity levels, and monitored growth. Slowly, Linda's hands began to learn what her mind was still struggling to grasp. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Linda stood by the greenhouse door, looking out over the land. The fields glowed gold in the fading light, and the air was alive with the sounds of crickets and distant laughter from the village. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose thrumming quietly beneath her ribs. This place, this land, wasn't just a refuge from what she had lost. It was a chance to build something new, and Linda intended to see it through. It was a Wednesday morning, about 2 weeks after Linda's first batch of mushrooms had been inoculated, when a black Mercedes rolled slowly up the gravel driveway, so out of place among the pickup trucks and dusty tractors that it seemed to drag the city's sharp edges with it. Linda was tending to the greenhouse humidity controls when Maggie appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You've got a visitor," she said, "and he's not here for mushrooms." Outside, a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit stood near the porch, sunglasses perched on his nose despite the overcast sky. He turned as Linda approached, his smile practiced and polished. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, smoothly extending a hand. "Richard Bowman. I've been wanting to meet you." Linda shook his hand warily. She knew the name. Everyone around here did. Bowman Foods was one of the largest agribusiness companies in the region, supplying everything from packaged produce to ready-made meals. Richard Bowman wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful. "Let's get right to it," he said, glancing around as if inspecting a property he already owned. "I've admired this land for a long time. Your aunt and I spoke several times over the years, though we never came to an agreement." "I heard," Linda said cautiously. "Well," he continued, "I'm hoping we can succeed where she and I failed." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder, laying it on the porch railing. "I'm prepared to offer you $4.2 million for the entire property, the land, the infrastructure, everything. Cash. You could walk away from all this tomorrow and never have to work another day in your life." The number hit Linda like a blow. For $0.2 million, she could buy a new house, start over anywhere she wanted. She could erase every trace of Daniel and the life that had crumbled around her. "I know it's a lot to take in," Bowman said, his tone silky. But think about it. Running a farm like this is hard work, especially for someone without experience. One bad season, one outbreak of contamination, and this place could go under. Why gamble your future when you could secure it right now? Linda's fingers brushed the folder, her heartbeat unsteady. He wasn't wrong, the work was hard, and every day seemed to reveal something new she didn't know. But then she thought of Maggie's words, of the people who had offered their help without hesitation, of the school and the clinic that depended on this land. "This isn't just a business," she said, pushing the folder back toward him. "It's part of the community. I can't sell it." The smooth mask on Bowman's face faltered, just slightly. "Are you sure you want to make that decision so quickly?" "I'm sure," Linda said, her voice firmer this time. Something shifted in his eyes. The warmth drained from his tone. "Well," he said, slipping the folder back into his case, "I hope you understand that refusing me has consequences." "Is that a threat?" "A fact," he replied coolly. "I have contracts with nearly every distributor in this region. If I tell them not to buy from you, they won't. I can flood the market with cheap mushrooms and drive prices down until you're forced to sell, and by then my offer will be far less generous." The words settled over her like a storm cloud. Bowman tipped his hat slightly and walked toward his car. "Think it over," he said before driving away, the sound of the engine fading down the dirt road. That night, Linda sat on the porch long after the sun had set, her tea growing cold beside her. Doubt gnawed at her. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was in over her head. If Bowman really did what he threatened, could she survive it? Jacob stopped by just before midnight, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. "I heard Bowman was here," he said, leaning against the railing. "Let me guess, he tried to scare you." Linda sighed. "He offered a fortune. And when I said no, he said he'd crush me." Jacob chuckled. "He's bluffing. He's tried it before, undercutting prices, buying out supply chains. He's got deep pockets, but not deep enough to lose money forever. And the thing is, people around here remember Lucille. They're loyal. He won't break that overnight." "Are you sure?" "Sure enough," Jacob said. "But here's what I do know. If you give up now, he wins. And if you don't, you've got a fighting chance." Linda looked out over the fields, the faint glow of the greenhouse lights shimmering in the dark. Fear still sat heavy in her chest, but beneath it was something sturdier, resolve. "I'm not selling," she said quietly. "Not now. Not ever." Jacob nodded. "That's the spirit. Then let's get ready for whatever comes next." And as the night deepened around them, Linda felt a flicker of strength take root. Fragile but unshakable, like the first threads of mycelium spreading quietly through the earth. By the time August rolled around, the farm no longer felt like a stranger's legacy. It felt like home. The greenhouse hummed with life, rows of oyster, shiitake, and lion's mane mushrooms fanning out in soft, rippling layers. The mycelium had done its work, transforming sawdust and straw into something far more valuable. Now, after weeks of preparation and anxious waiting, it was time for the first harvest. The morning of the harvest dawned crisp and bright. Linda was up before sunrise, her boots sinking into the damp earth as she crossed the fields. Maggie was already there, sleeves rolled up, a clipboard tucked under her arm. "Today's the big day," she said, grinning. "Ready." "Not even close," Linda admitted, laughing breathlessly. "But let's do it anyway." Word had spread quickly through the community, and by mid-morning the farm was alive with movement. Trucks and carts rolled up the dirt road, villagers unloading baskets of wild mushrooms they'd foraged from the nearby woods. Chanterelles, morels, and porcini, their earthy aroma filling the air. Children chased each other between the apple trees, while their parents haggled good-naturedly over weights and prices. Inside the main storage building, workers sorted the wild mushrooms alongside the cultivated ones from the greenhouse. Crates lined the walls, filling rapidly as the harvest poured in. The cold storage unit hummed steadily, its shelves stacked with freshly packed shipments. In the drying shed, industrial fans whirred as trays of sliced mushrooms began the slow transformation into shelf-stable delicacies. Linda moved among them, sleeves rolled up, clipboard in hand. She weighed baskets, printed invoices, and scribbled orders, her hands aching but her heart light. For the first time since she'd stepped foot on this land, she wasn't just trying to keep up, she was thriving. And the best part wasn't the money, though the orders were coming in faster than she could fill them. It was the look on people's faces when they left with their pay, real, meaningful income that would help them through the season. "This is what Lucille meant," Maggie said quietly as they watched a group of foragers count their earnings. "This is why she refused to sell." Linda nodded, the truth of it settling deep in her chest. This wasn't just business. It was a heartbeat. The demand was overwhelming. A small farm-to-table restaurant in Philadelphia placed a standing order for weekly deliveries. A specialty grocery chain in Pittsburgh doubled their usual order after a single tasting. Even a high-end supermarket in New York reached out, wanting exclusive rights to some of the wild varieties. Every time Linda opened her email, there was another request waiting. And with each order, more of Lucille's old partners resurfaced. Some had drifted away after Lucille's death, uncertain about the farm's future. But once they saw that Linda was serious, that she was honoring the same standards and commitments Lucille had built her reputation on, they came back. Some even drove out to Willow Creek themselves, shaking Linda's hand and telling her they hadn't seen the farm this alive in years. Through it all, Richard Bowman hovered, like a storm cloud that refused to break. He showed up twice that month, each time in a different luxury car, each time with a new offer, higher than the last. But Linda never met with him. Jacob made sure of that, positioning himself by the gate whenever Bowman's car appeared. "She said no the first time," Jacob told him bluntly, "and she'll keep saying no. Turn that car around." Bowman would sneer, mutter something under his breath, and drive away. And each time he did, his shadow over the farm seemed to shrink just a little more. The villagers noticed it too. They began refusing his buyers outright, choosing instead to work exclusively with Linda. "She's one of us," they said simply. "We'd rather sell to her for less than bow to him for more." One evening, as the sun dipped low over the orchard, Linda stood outside the greenhouse, watching the day wind down. The fields glowed gold in the fading light, and the laughter of children echoed across the property. Her muscles ached, and there were still invoices to file and emails to answer, but she didn't care. For the first time in years, exhaustion felt good, honest, earned. Maggie joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Do you realize what you've done?" she asked. Linda shook her head. "Not yet. I'm too tired to think." "You've brought this place back to life," Maggie said simply. "And you did it your way." Linda looked out over the land, the greenhouses glowing softly, the barns full, the cold storage humming. She thought about where she had been just a few months ago, sitting alone in a kitchen in Lancaster, her marriage collapsing around her. And now here she was, building something that mattered. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. She belonged here. This wasn't a stopgap or a hiding place. It was her home. And no offer, no threat, no amount of money could change that. By the end of September, the numbers spoke for themselves. The first full harvest had not only covered all of Linda's operating costs, but left her with a healthy reserve, more than enough to reinvest in the farm's future. For someone who had arrived with nothing but 2 suitcases and a broken marriage, it felt almost unreal. "Not bad for a first season," Maggie said, handing Linda a ledger as they sat on the porch one evening. The pages were filled with neat columns of figures, revenue, expenses, orders fulfilled. Lucille would have been proud. Linda traced her finger down the numbers, a smile tugging at her lips. "We did it," she said quietly. "We actually did it." The success of the harvest rippled far beyond the farm. Word spread quickly, and soon the guest cabins that had stood empty for years were fully booked. Families from Philadelphia and New York arrived seeking a break from city life, eager to experience the rhythms of the countryside. They spent their mornings wandering the orchards, their afternoons learning to identify mushrooms in the forest, and their evenings gathered around fire pits, trading stories under the stars. The influx of visitors brought new energy and new ideas. Linda and Maggie spent long evenings brainstorming ways to expand beyond raw mushroom sales. They began experimenting with drying and packaging mushrooms for gourmet markets. And Maggie dusted off Lucille's old recipe books to develop a line of sauces and spreads. What about tours? Maggie suggested one night, sketching ideas on a notepad. People love picking their own mushrooms. We could do guided foraging walks, maybe even weekend workshops. Linda grinned. I love that. We'll make it more than just a farm. We'll make it an experience. The more they planned, the more Linda realized she was no longer just maintaining Lucille's legacy. She was building on it. This place was evolving, growing into something new, something uniquely hers. Meanwhile, Richard Bowman's grip on the region began to loosen. His threats to undercut prices had failed when foragers and small-scale growers chose loyalty over profit. In a desperate attempt to keep his workforce from leaving to join Linda's operation, he was forced to raise wages and offer bonuses, a move that cut into his profits and still wasn't enough to sway many of them. Bowman's furious, Jacob told Linda one afternoon as they loaded crates into a truck bound for Philadelphia. He thought you'd fold in a month. Instead, you're taking business he's had locked down for years. Linda shook her head. I'm not trying to take anything from him. Jacob chuckled. Doesn't matter. You're proving there's another way to do this. One that doesn't crush the little guy. That scares men like him. And he was right. Bowman's presence in Willow Creek grew smaller by the week, while Linda's influence grew stronger. Local suppliers who had once worked exclusively with his company began partnering with her instead. Restaurants that had never heard of Lucille's farm now called Linda directly, eager to feature her mushrooms on their menus. But perhaps the most meaningful change wasn't in the ledgers or the contracts. It was in the people. At the end of the harvest season, the townspeople organized a small celebration at the farm. Tables laden with food lined the orchard. Children ran laughing through the rows of trees, and a local band played folk tunes as the sun dipped below the horizon. During a lull in the festivities, an elderly woman approached Linda, pressing her hands gently into Linda's. Thank you, she said simply, for not selling, for keeping this place alive. It means more than you know. One by one, others echoed her gratitude. Farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, all of them bound by the land in ways Linda was only beginning to understand. As twilight deepened and lanterns flickered to life in the trees, Linda stood at the edge of the orchard, looking out over the fields. The greenhouse lights glowed softly in the distance, the cabins were alive with laughter, and the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and possibility. This was more than survival. It was a rebirth, not just for the farm, but for her too. She had come here broken and uncertain, unsure of who she was without Daniel. Now she knew. She was a steward of something greater than herself. She was part of a legacy worth fighting for. And for the first time in years, Linda felt whole. The afternoon sun slanted low across the fields, bathing the land in a warm, golden light that only autumn could bring. From the wide porch of the farmhouse, Linda watched children darting around the edge of the pond, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves drifting from the apple trees. Beyond them, the rows of mushroom houses stretched in neat lines, their ventilation fans humming softly as workers moved between them with baskets and crates. It was a scene full of life, the kind of life she once thought she'd never have again. A soft breeze lifted her hair as she leaned against the porch railing, her eyes tracing the horizon where the land met the sky. She thought back to that night in Lancaster. The sharpness of Daniel's voice, the humiliation in his words, the cold finality of the door closing behind him. "You'll never make it on your own," he had said. "You're not cut out for anything real. You'll fall apart without me." Linda smiled, not bitterly but with a quiet, knowing warmth. Look at me now, she thought. He had been wrong about everything. Far from falling apart, she had built something enduring, something that didn't just sustain her but sustained others too. The woman who had once been dismissed as a burden, as just there, was now the heart of a thriving enterprise and a community that depended on her. She was no longer defined by the man who left her or the life that crumbled around her. She was defined by what she had built in its place. Down by the greenhouse, Maggie was directing a group of workers unloading fresh substrate for the next growth cycle. Jacob was repairing a fence by the orchard, his flannel shirt rolled to his elbows, his movements steady and unhurried. A few of the local kids waved up at Linda from the pond, their cheeks flushed from running. She waved back, her chest swelling with a kind of happiness she had never known before, one that wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. Richard Bowman's sleek black car had not been seen in weeks. After his last failed attempt to intimidate her, his influence over the region had begun to wane. Suppliers stopped taking his calls. Growers who had once depended on him now delivered their harvests directly to Linda's loading docks. Even his own employees had begun leaving for better conditions elsewhere, some of them showing up on Linda's doorstep, asking if she had work. As for Daniel, he had become little more than a ghost from another life. Word around Lancaster was that Vanessa's pregnancy had ended abruptly and that the two of them had since split. His company had suffered setbacks too, a few bad deals chipping away at the empire he'd been so proud of. Once, that news might have filled Linda with vindication. Now it barely registered. She didn't need him to fail to feel whole. She only needed to keep building her own life. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. The air carried the faint scent of wood smoke from a fire someone had lit near the cabins. Soon the guests would gather there, roasting marshmallows under the stars. Tomorrow, families from the city would arrive for a weekend of foraging tours and farm-to-table dinners. And next week, a shipment of dried shiitake and lion's mane would leave for a boutique store in Manhattan, the biggest order the farm had ever received. Linda closed her eyes for a moment, breathing it all in. The laughter, the wind, the earthy scent of mushrooms and soil. Every detail felt like a stitch in the tapestry of a life she had sewn from scraps and heartbreak. "Harvest starting early this year," Maggie called from below the porch. "We're thinking of starting the first round tomorrow." Linda smiled down at her. "Let's do it," she said. "I'll be right there." As the last light of the day melted into dusk, she walked down the steps and joined the others in the fields. Together, they moved among the mushroom beds, carefully cutting the tender clusters and laying them gently into baskets. The children helped too, giggling as they carried small loads to the crates. Lanterns flickered to life one by one, casting a warm glow over the land as the harvest continued under the deepening sky. Linda paused for a moment, straightening up and looking around her, at the fields, the people, the home she had created. This was more than success. It was peace. It was strength. It was proof that she had not just survived, but thrived. And as the night settled gently over Willow Creek, Linda felt certain of one thing. This was only the beginning. The farm, the people, the life she had rebuilt, they were all part of a future still unfolding. And she would meet it not as the woman who had been cast aside, but as the woman who rose anyway and built a life more beautiful than anyone ever believed she could.